This Film is Lit, the podcast where we finally settle the score on one simple question. Is the book really better than the movie? I'm Brian, and I have a film degree, so I watch the movie, but don't read the book.
And I'm Katie. I have an English degree, so I do things the right way and read the book before we watch the movie.
So prepare to be wowed by our expertise and charm as we dissect all of your favorite film adaptations and decide if the silver screen or the written word did it better. So turn it up, settle in, and get ready for spoilers, because this film is lit. As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. It's GoodFellas, and this film is lit. Hello and welcome back to This Film is Lit, the podcast where we talk about movies that are based on books. We're doing GoodFellas this week. It is a patron request making up for another patron request, which led to us doing The Godfather, which was nice. But we are getting to GoodFellas now. It's going to be fun. We got lots to talk about. Got most of our segments. Guess who?
No.
Not really character descriptions?
Not really.
Okay, if you say so. But we do have the rest of our segments, so we're going to get right into it with our first one. In case you have not read or watched the movie recently, we're going to give you a little bit of a summary in Let Me Sum Up.
Let me explain. No, there is too much. Let me sum up.
GoodFellas / Wise Guy follows gangster Henry Hill during his time in the Italian mafia, starting with a job at a mob-owned cab stand at 12 years old. Henry loves the life and excels at it. The narrative sees Henry grow up, get married, commit lots and lots of crime, have a cushy stay in prison, and eventually help plan and execute one of the biggest heists ever committed in America, the Lufthansa heist. Henry eventually begins selling drugs, and that's what gets him caught by the feds. After he gets caught, he knows that he can't go back to his old life because his friends won't trust him. So he turns informant and enters the witness protection program.
There you go. That is the movie as well. As she mentioned at the beginning, I have quite a few questions that I'm interested to find out. Was that in the book?
Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone.
The what?
Honestly, don't you two read?
So the movie starts, we start right in on the action in the film. We don't know what's going on. They're driving down the road. They hear a sound in the trunk. And they pull over, and there's a guy in the trunk who they thought was dead that they have to murder. We'll talk a little bit more about the details here in just a second. But my first question is, does the book start as sort of in media res in the same way that the film does? Because in the film, we then jump back, years. Well, I mean, we jump back decades to Henry's childhood. But basically, we jump back years and then catch back up to the point that we start the film at. And then we go on from there. And I wanted to know if the book follows that same sort of non-linear storytelling structure.
No, the book is all linear. So that scene does happen, but it's not the cold open of the book. I did really enjoy that change, though.
Mm-hmm. So the book, I assume, starts kind of with Henry's childhood? Or?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So where we go next in the film.
Yeah, that's the beginning of the book.
Yeah. And I think it's a good hook. It's definitely gets you immediately invested in what's going on in a way that starting on Henry's childhood may not.
Yeah,
because you're instantly like, well, how did we get, who are these people? What's going on? And then when you jump back and you see, fresh-faced 13-year-old Henry, you're like, how did we get to where he is now? It's a very fun change. I mentioned, but they hear him in the trunk as they're driving down the road, and they realize that Billy is still alive, and then they pull over and stab and shoot him to death. Do they have the same experience in the book of hearing banging and wondering like what that is, and then like, oh shit, it's the guy in the trunk? Because that was horrifying.
Yeah, all of that happens in the book.
Great. Cool. Terrifying. Terrible. And then we get the freeze frame after they kill Billy, and we get Henry's voiceover that I started the episode with, which is as far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster, which is probably the most famous line from the movie. It's not the first line in the movie, but it's the first line of of narration.
It's like the first line of voiceover,
I think it is. And it's also probably not the most famous line in the movie. It's one of the most, like, funny how is probably the most famous line, maybe. Funny like a clown. But it is one of, and I wanted to know if that came from the book.
Not that exact line, but there's a pretty close line in that kind of first chapter where we're talking about how he got started, which is, at the age of 12, my ambition was to be a gangster, to be a wise guy.
So we get a title drop in the very
Yes.
in the very beginning. We don't get the title drop quite so early in the movie. They do eventually talk about GoodFellas. Mm-hmm. I think it's when Tommy's about to get killed later on. But yeah, I will say that I think I prefer the movie's derivation of that line.
Yeah, the movie's line is a better line.
It's a little punchier, a little more memorable than at the age of 12, my ambition. Like, that's a little dry compared to as far back as I can remember. I always
there's some parts of the book that are a little dry.
Okay. So then we jump back, as we mentioned, to Henry's childhood and kind of follow what led him into his life of crime. And he started working. He always sort of admired how respected the mafia members in his neighborhood were. And he immediately got a job working, like, running errands at their taxi stand or whatever. Mm-hmm. And he, at one point, he gets in trouble with his dad because he's skipping school to, like, spend all day working at the taxi stand. And they get a letter from his school that gets delivered in the mail. And that's how his dad knows he's been skipping school. And when they find this out, Henry goes to Tootie, I think, and it's like, hey, I can't work here as much. My dad's getting on me because I've been skipping school. And they go and they find the mailman who delivers the letters to their house, and they, like, rough him up. Mm-hmm. And they're like, you don't deliver any more letters from the school to that house. You give them to us, which I thought was funny. I mean, it's not funny. It's terrifying, but it's also funny.
Kind of funny.
Yes. And I wanted to know if that happened in the book.
That is directly from the book, yeah. They find the mailman and rough him up.
Very good. So far, like, everything.
Yeah.
I feel like that might be a trend.
I feel, that's a trend.
Cool. We didn't get a line in the movie as he's kind of talking about how the mafia operates, which I don't think the word mafia is ever used in this movie. Calls them wise guys, good fellas, all kinds of stuff. Never says, like, the mafia or whatever.
No, yeah,
I think the family is used a couple times, maybe.
I
think it is, because I think that later on they're like, when they're talking about Tommy, like, joining the family and how they can't be because they're whatever.
They're not full-blooded Italian.
They're not full-blooded Italian, yeah. But there's a line in the movie where Henry's talking about how they offer protection for people who can't go to the cops. They're like a police department for wise guys. And I wanted to know if that line came from the book, because I thought it was interesting. And there's some more of this that we'll talk about a little bit later. I have a note that I think in my odds and ends that I just thought was sort of a similar recurring thing, I guess a little bit from The Godfather, maybe not as prevalent there, about sort of this group of this community creating their own form of government, for lack of like institutionalized protection and all kinds of things, and like commerce, and it's just like, anyways, I wanted to know if that line came from the book, because I thought it was a rather insightful line.
Yeah, that line is like almost verbatim from the book, that whole section, kind of. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is interesting, and it kind of echoes, you mentioned The Godfather, but that idea of like protection for people when our official institutions are not going to give them protection. In The Godfather, we had Amerigo Bonazetti, I think.
I think that sounds right. That sounds like a right name.
Who was the Undertaker.
Yes.
Who goes to The Godfather because his daughter was assaulted, and they let the guys who did it off. Yeah.
And that was the note I was going to get to, is that it's very clear early on that Scorsese is trying to make a point of the fact that this is all commentary on how the system fails normal people. Mm-hmm. And I say normal people, I mean like not rich people.
Right.
Working class people.
And of course, this is a far less romanticized version than like kind of what we see in The Godfather.
Yes.
At least. Because part of the point here is that they can't go to the cops because they're also criminals.
They're also criminals. Yes, that is at least a part of it. But I think the idea still is that they're going for. And I did read a quote at some point about how Scorsese talked about how the point of the movie is to explore the fact that when the system fails people, like what it is, kind of an exploration of what it is about the system, why this thing exists, why Henry Hill goes down the path he does. Because he exists in a system that fails people, and when that happens, they create their own systems to elevate themselves in a way. And it's the same thing. It's kind of it all kind of boils down to the same thing that we see in like online communities of there's a constant discussion about like why people fall into like the alt-right pipeline or like in seldom like message boards and all that sort of stuff. And they all have, and all of those communities tend to have their own ideas about what it is that's failing. And it tends to be stupid things like women or, it's usually women. It's usually or minorities or, people of color, that sort of thing are the root of their problem. When in fact, it's not that. That's not. Those are also people being failed by the system. And the failure is a much larger scale institutional failure of the way our economic society is structured.
Yeah, and that is, I would say, like expanded on a little more in the book.
Yeah.
I think the movie touches on it, but in the first section of the book, Henry does talk a lot about how, like, he grows up in this working class neighborhood and he watches everyone around him, including his dad, like work and scrabble.
That's what he talks about in the movie a lot.
Work his fingers to the bone and still be poor.
Yeah.
And his conclusion from that is, why would I do that?
Why? Yeah. What's the point? They're schmucks.
Yeah. When I could go be in this other institution.
Yeah. And I think, I will say that I think that the movie, maybe one of its, I don't know, I could be argued out of this, that I do think that the movie definitely makes a big point of that in the beginning. Mm-hmm. I don't know if it carries through with that messaging as hard throughout. And now maybe you don't need to, like maybe like setting that up as sort of the garden that we're in, like, and it's sort of exploring why it is that Henry goes down the path that he does in the beginning. And then not really, like, I guess my point is that we don't really continue to like hit on that point, at least not explicitly. Sort of everything that follows implicitly hits on that point. Like everything that follows is sort of the cacophony of disastrous sort of decisions that Henry makes for the rest of his life, all stem from the fact that he feels disempowered and disenfranchised, and everybody he knows feels disempowered and disenfranchised. The movie doesn't really continue to hit on the same sort of points that they set up in the beginning, but I don't think it necessarily needs to, I guess. I guess I'm arguing myself out of my critique of initially of like, it very strongly in the first 10 or 15 minutes, several times reiterates the point that, like you said, it's the system that has failed, and all of these people he knows work really hard and just continue to be poor and whatnot. And the movie doesn't, after that first 20 minutes, doesn't really come back to that. But it doesn't, I don't know if it necessarily has to, because it does
I think the focus of that, like, point is not the focus of that point, but like the kind of journey that he's on is not like it's not a story about like, oh, everyone's disenfranchised, so we're gonna like focus on what's wrong with the system that is and like dismantling it.
Right.
It's more like, this system sucks, so I'm gonna go be a part of this other system that rocks.
Yes, and then also showing that, and I guess by its nature, the fact that Henry's story ends the way it does, it is a tragedy in the same, in a similar way, not in the same way that The Godfather is. It is sort of a similar, tragic, narrative arc for our main character, sort of his rise and then fall. Although in the Godfather, the comparison being that he's still rising, at least, like from the outside. Like he's rising in the sense of like he's rising in the mob or whatever, in the mafia at the end of the Godfather. Whereas we know as the audience that he's actually he is now he's gone over the hill and is descended into the thing he did not want to become.
Right.
At the beginning of the story, Henry achieves the thing he wants and then goes off the cliff. And I'm betting in the future Godfather movies they kind of follow a similar. It's interesting. They're tragedies in different ways, I think, but I think they're both fascinating in that regard. I was just interested to see if the book had the same sort of criticism of the system or what have you that the movie has, because I do think, like I said, I read an interview or something where Scorsese was like, that was his point. He says it in a very roundabout, sort of ambiguous way of like, you know, I wanted audiences to leave the theater contemplating what kind of system creates a person that takes the actions that Henry does over the course of his life, like what it is about the system that creates a person that does that.
Right.
And not so much celebrating like what he is.
I think what makes... I think the book is similar in that it touches on that idea, but doesn't necessarily like marinate in it.
Yeah.
And I think the thing that makes getting that kind of message maybe a little bit tough from this narrative is that Henry, his kind of disgust with it is maybe a little bit misplaced, because his disgust is not necessarily on the system, it's on the people who
failing
aren't
within
smart
the system.
enough
Yes.
to know how to outwit the system.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, that is kind of his, and thinking he's smarter than that, and then whoop, rug pull. You're not. you're just another schmuck who gets, you know, screwed by the system, just in a different way.
Yeah.
Which it is interesting. Yeah. So we talked about this in the prequel, so I kind of know the answer, but I still wanted to ask and make sure there wasn't any parallel that, like, because again, some of these things, when I'm doing that research, I never know how true some of those facts you find are. You know, it's like, oh, this was completely improvised in the movie, and like maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But I wanted to know. We get to a scene at one of the clubs, and this is one of the famous scenes from the film where Tommy, Joe Pesci's character, is telling a story, and Henry is laughing maniacally at him, and then at the end of his story tells him, you know, Tommy, you're really funny, and Tommy like stops and says, funny how? Funny like a clown? Do I amuse you? And like becomes this very serious, like weird, very awkward energy in the room as Tommy interrogates him about how he's funny. And I wanted to know if that scene was in the book at all.
It's not, but I did really like the addition of that scene, because Tommy is a similarly kind of unsettlingly like psychotic kind of character in the book. And I liked everything about that scene, like how just unsettling Tommy is, and Henry's like increasingly aggressive, maniacal laughter as the scene goes on.
Yeah, like before the drop. Yeah, he's like he and he does that throughout the movie at several times where he has just a crazy laugh, like a horror, like it. You can't tell. It seems fake, but it also might not be. Like it seems like a weird forced fake laughter, but it also maybe he just laughs like a psycho. Like maybe that, I don't know. It's very interesting. But for people who didn't listen to the prequel, I had read that and talked about in the prequel that episode was supposedly improvised during like rehearsals by Joe Pesci, based on an experience he had as a waiter, where he like waited on somebody in the mafia and saw a very similar interaction or something like that, and so decided to kind of bring it into the film. We get this line at one point where, and I didn't know if this is where this comes from, like because this is like sort of become a mimetic, like internet like, I mean, it feels like a thing you see like, you know what I mean, like it's just sort of part of the cultural zeitgeist, like occasionally, and that is fuck you, pay me.
Yeah. And
Henry is talking about how like the mafia gets their money and how they're, you know, you're a little late this month, fuck you, pay me, that sort of thing. He repeats it a bunch of times, and I wasn't sure if that came from this movie or if that's from something else, and I also wanted to know if it was in the book or if it's something the movie added. And then apart from that, and you don't have the answer to this, I was just wondering, maybe a listener does, if like fuck you, pay me is like older culturally than GoodFellas. I don't know.
It is from the book.
Okay.
Again, it's like almost verbatim. That stretch of like, fuck you, pay me, blah blah blah, fuck you, pay me. I don't know if it's comes from something else like prior to
Yeah.
the book. I have no idea. I do think it's an interesting, like, because what this book kind of ends up being is like a deconstruction of that kind of romanticized view of like the mob, the mafia. You know, we talked a minute ago about how the people that the system fails like kind of create their own institution, but in reality, are they really being protected by these people?
No,
Right?
not
You know,
really,
because
yeah.
and there's a lot in the book that like expands on like, oh, you know, your restaurant is protected by the mafia, sure, so you're not gonna get shaken down by like this other crime family.
Right, yeah.
But at the
they'll come
same
shake you
time,
down.
yeah, they'll come shake you down. They'll come eat all your food and
Yeah.
drink all your liquor and never pay you for it.
Right.
And you know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. It is interesting. But yeah, it's just because, like I said, I feel like "fuck you, pay me" it's a thing you see, not a lot, but it's like a thing that people just say sometimes in the world on the internet, and I didn't know if it started in this film or slash book, or if it was from something before that. So you kind of touched on it already about Tommy's sort of off-putting nature, but I wanted to know if he is the same sort of like loose cannon that you can tell is going to be trouble from like minute one of this. Not minute one, because when he's introduced as like a teenager, we see him once as a teenager. There's like one very short scene, and we don't really get anything, but once he's Joe Pesci, and we see him from like minute one, it's very clear that this man is trouble. He is going to cause problems because he has a weird short fuse, and he's a hothead and a bit of a psychopath. And I know I'm not using that term clinically. And I wanted to know if you get the same vibe from Tommy in the book, because it's horrifying, and
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely like the person with the short fuse who gets offended at like the slightest little thing.
Yeah.
Except when he gets offended, he's probably gonna kill you.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. And it's terrifying, and I feel like everybody knows a person like that. Like, maybe not to the extent that Tommy is, like, because he like literally kills random people over. Not saying like kill, but like, you know, everybody has at least known one person who has a short fuse and gets bent out of shape about stuff. You're like,
And
it's not a
like,
big,
totally unpredictable.
like just
too.
and just unpredictable. You're like, it's not a big. Just why are you okay? Like, why are you being like this? Can you not? It's fine. Yeah. So we get Tommy wants Henry to come out on a date with him because he wants to date this girl, and she won't go out with him unless because she doesn't trust Italians, unless her girlfriend Karen comes with her, and then they go on like a double date, and he drags Henry along on this double date, and Henry is like isn't having it. He's not interested, and he kind of is a dick the whole time. And then they have a second date, and Henry stands up Karen, who was the date on the first date. And I don't know why she wanted to go out with him again after that first date. But after he stands her up on the second date, she forces Tommy, and I can't remember Tommy's girl. It's not his wife, I don't think, later. So, or maybe it is. I don't remember, because we never really see his personal situation. Forces him to go drive around and find Henry, and she like runs up on him in the middle of the street and just starts berating him in front of all of his, you know, gangster friends and whatnot for standing him up. And she's very fiery, and it's a fun scene. And I wanted to know if that scene was in the book.
Yes, it is. I loved that scene in both the book and the movie. I don't think it was so much that she wanted to be on a second date with him as it is that she was offended that he stood her up.
No, I get that. I get that. And they're definitely playing off the idea. And I guess I assume it's similar in the book that they're that she can stand up for herself in a way that probably he's not expecting most women to. Like it's the 50s, 60s at this 50s, I think, at this point. Or 60s, I don't know, whatever.
60s, I think.
And yeah, so they're all very misogynistic and not expecting women that will, like, you know, stand up for themselves. And so yeah, I like that scene. I thought it was a fun scene. So then after that kind of he softens to her. He's impressed by her chutzpah. She's Jewish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And he's impressed by her, and so they start dating more and more, and they have this scene where he's taking her to the Copacabana, and this is funny. We talked about this in the prequel that in the film they were planning, or when they were filming it, supposedly they were planning to go through the front of the Copacabana, but there was some sort of issue and they couldn't, so they did this big long one take through the back. And when I read that in the thing, it felt like bullshit to me because you don't do a shot like that on a whim. Like I don't know. I don't know what the story would be behind it. Maybe it's more complicated, and maybe they were planning in the very early stages to just go through the front. Because, like I said, it couldn't be like they showed up to film it, and they're like, "Oh, we can't go in through the front. Well, let's just plan this long single take.
We'll do a very elaborate
We'll
shot
choreograph
instead.
40 extras and what? Okay, yeah. So clearly they had been planning that, but who knows how it. Whatever. But they go in through the kitchen, like through the back of the Copacabana, through the kitchen, and then out and it's all one take. One of the more famous single take shots in cinema. There are a lot of them, but it's one of the more famous ones. And I wanted to know if they go in through the back of the Copacabana in the book, because this would also put a potential kibosh on the rumor that this was not planned from the beginning in the film.
All right, well, hold on to your hat. They do go to the Copacabana on a date, and it is mentioned that they go in through the kitchen.
So I'm thinking that's bullshit. I don't know where. I don't know where. I'm trying to remember if that was an IMDb trivia fact or if that was a Wikipedia / other article I found. But I'm thinking that might just be nonsense.
Kind of sounds.
I'm wondering where it's sourced from. If it was like a DVD commentary thing, or because that's a lot of times that's where that kind of stuff comes from, is like commentary tracks or whatever, or interviews. But the fact that they go through the kitchen in the book makes me think that would always have been the plan.
Yeah, you would think.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't like make a thing out of it in the
Right.
book. It's just mentioned that they go in through the kitchen. I did really love this scene in the movie.
It's fantastic.
The way it's shot is so cool.
Yeah.
One of the like long take shots that I've seen that I like one of my favorites now, I think. Not that I've seen a ton of long take shots.
Are we watching Children of Men soon?
Yeah, maybe.
Maybe soon-ish. There's a bunch in that one. There's like two very famous ones in that one.
We'll see.
Has one of my favorite.
I'll be the judge of them.
It has one of my favorite ones, but
And
yeah, it is a good one.
I especially really liked at the end where they're like setting up the table as they're walking up.
Yeah, that's a good moment, and it does such a good job of, especially once they get into the club, of showing Henry's connection.
Yeah, and
like
his
how,
like charisma.
Yeah, his charisma and how much everybody sort of is attracted to him and how he's friends with everybody, or at least friendly with everybody, and everybody knows who he is and that sort of thing. And how and I also think that the way the camera sort of sweeps through everything, you feel like you're getting drug along in the same way that Karen is in this scene, because this is like their third or fourth. It's very early in their relationship, and the fact that we get kind of pulled along on this ride, on this shot, and it feels like we're sort of mimicking the way she's being pulled along on this. Oh yeah, absolutely. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like I even made a note, like, God, who would not be intoxicated by that in the early days of a relationship? Yeah, that would be like, whew.
Yeah. Then at one point, this is a little scene, but Karen shows up and mention I don't remember how she calls Henry, I think, and is like crying, and he comes and finds her at like a phone booth, and she had been assaulted by her neighbor, who we had met earlier at like a tennis
see him at
club
like the
or
country club
or something like that. But he had like tried to come onto her, and she had tried to stop him, and he had like assaulted her, and Henry does not let this stand, so he drives over to their house and just pistol whips this guy nearly to death in the street. Very intense. Want to know if that happened in the book?
Yeah, it does.
Good Lord. Also, is she then very turned on by this?
Yes, she is. So she went somewhere with this guy from her neighborhood. He like asked her to come run an errand with him or something, and she like doesn't think anything of it because it's just this guy that she's known for like years and years. And then he tries to like, he gets fresh with her. Yeah. And when she doesn't want anything to do with him, he pushes her out of the car while it's moving. I think,
that was
like,
and that was the implication in the movie. Yeah.
Yeah, so then he comes over and pistol whips that guy. And hands off the pistol to her to hide, and she's like, let me pull up my reading notes because I know I wrote down exactly what, because there are sections of the book that are like Karen's perspective, like similar to how we
Yeah,
get her
and we get her
voiceover.
voiceover in the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, so it kind of bounces back and forth.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I was really excited. I loved that Henry had done all this for me. It made me feel important.
There you go.
And I was like, oh, girl. Oh, honey.
Oof. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of like, and I say casual racism. It's not, I say casual in the sense that it's like not directed at anybody in the, like, you know, there's not like racist confrontations at any point in the movie, but there is like casual racism of like lots of, and it's like a handful of times of characters using the N-word, talking about how, you know, black criminals get caught because they're stupid and stuff like that. Like there's a handful of sort of, again, like casually racist, objectively, obviously very racist, but like, again,
but like that, it's not like one of the main points.
It's not a point of the I guess when I'm saying casual, I mean like it's not a point of the movie in any way. And I was wondering if that comes from the book or if that's just in the movie.
Yeah, I would say that the book is very similar. There are like throwaway lines here and there where they'll be like, oh, the black criminals are lazy, that's why they can't get ahead, or like you said, like they're stupid, that's why they get caught,
right,
kind of thing. Not a ton of instances of that.
Yeah, I mean, there's not a ton in the movie. It's like, a few times.
I will say that the N-word does not appear in the book at all. So there's that.
And I do
make of that what you will.
Yeah, I do wonder if, I mean, it's 1990 when this movie came out. I do wonder if that's not defending it, but if that's Scorsese and them being like, well, they would say the N-word. Like that's,
maybe.
These people would just be racist. Like that's what, like they're, you know, it's the 1960s. Like they would just, and again, I know there's conversations about whether or not that being true, you should still use that in your period, your period like pieces of literature or film or whatever, and I get that, but I do think that would be my guess of why, but it is, it's one of those things where it's like, there, and that was one of the things I was thinking about earlier, which is like, it is a thing that's still a problem, and maybe this is the movie doing this. Maybe if it's doing it poorly. I will say that there is no sort of commiseration or class solidarity in the sense that, you know, all of these Italian immigrants who form the mafia, they're all incredibly racist towards black people, while having been historically incredibly discriminated against by by English Europeans or English Americans and literally from England when I say English Americans. And other people for a long time, Italian people weren't really considered white, quote unquote, at different times throughout history. And I do wonder if there's like a sort of wry irony that is trying to be presented in the fact that but I don't, if that is the case, I don't think it does a good job. I think it's no. It's not remotely, doesn't seem like the point. But I think if you looked at it through the right lens, you can see, as a more enlightened viewer, you can see the irony. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Like, you can see the irony in these people who are fed up with the system and talking about how the system has failed everybody and how the only way they can get ahead in life is by doing crime. And then also being like, and black people are stupid and terrible and we hate them. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's an irony there that is, I think, interesting.
I think it goes back to the same thing that I mentioned earlier of like feeling like being able to create this alternate system now makes them better than.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, the book does mention like, I guess you could call them like alliances between like different racial groups.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, and I think the movie might mention that like once, but
and obviously we know that they like work with people of other groups, but
Yeah.
they're not part of the in group.
Yes. Yeah. And they talk about them terribly
Yes.
when they're not around. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. There's a scene in the movie where this is well after everything has gone down. Henry is a very successful mafioso at this point.
Criminal.
Yeah. And Karen is well aware of this. They're married. They have a kid, I think, at this point. I can't remember exactly where this happens. Pretty sure they have a kid at this point. And at one point, Henry's leaving to go to work or something, or do something. And Karen asks for some money. And he goes and he gives her a stack of money so she can go shopping or whatever. And as he's getting ready, and then he goes to leave. And as he's leaving, she gets down on her knees and to proceed to pleasure him, shall we say. And there's this line in the movie that has always cracked me up, is that and especially the delivery of it. She does it, and he's like, he has been talking about how he was running late. And then she does that, and he goes, "Oh, all right." And the delivery of that line has always cracked me up for some reason. And I wanted to know if that was in the book.
It's not, but I did think it was funny. She does ask for money in the book by indicating how many inches of money she
does
wants.
that, yes. In the movie, he says how much, and she just like holds up two fingers, like, you know. Yeah, which I thought was fun too. But yeah, that line, "Oh, all right," was just, I don't know, it just cracks me up. We got to talk about this. We're finally now getting back to the moment where the film started, which is where the murder of Billy, whatever his name is,
Billy Batts.
And this is all set off where they're hanging out at a bar, and Billy Batts just got out of prison, I think, or is just in town or whatever. I don't know.
I think he's just out of prison.
I think he was just out of prison, and he's at the same bar, and he's from a rival, a different, not rival necessarily, but another mafia family. Yeah. And he's talking to Tommy and how it's, he knew Tommy when he was a little kid, and he's giving him shit for, he was always shining shoes when he was a kid. And Tommy's like, "Hey, I'm not shining shoes anymore." And they're like kind of jawing back and forth, just giving each other shit. And eventually it leads to a point where sort of the instigating line is, it seems like everything's blown over. Like they've kind of quashed the beef. And then Billy says, "Now go home and get your fucking shine box." And that sets everything off again. And Tommy leaves, and that's what eventually comes back and murders him. And I wanted to know if the whole shine box thing and that line, "Now go home and get your fucking shine box," is from the book.
So that specific line is not from the book.
Okay.
But Tommy does get mad at Billy because he won't stop talking about how Tommy used to shine shoes.
Okay, so same idea.
Yeah, same idea. They just added like that specific line.
Gotcha. So they beat the shit out. And I say they, Henry, at least by this retelling, Henry is not involved in the beating the shit out of him. Who knows how true? Again, because from my understanding, this book is very much told from like interviews with Henry.
It's Henry
right?
Hill's account of Henry Hill's life.
Right. And so Henry Hill didn't kill this guy at all. He was just there. Like he was just around and kind of helped get rid of the body. He didn't do any of the killing. Who knows? But Jimmy and Tommy like beat the shit out of Billy, and then they think he's dead, and they get him and they throw him in the trunk, and they got to go take him somewhere to bury him. And on the way, they need to pick up a shovel, and so they stop at Tommy's mom's house. And this scene is hilarious. This is one of those scenes that I remembered very vividly from watching this previous times. They stop to get a shovel, and they're like trying to be quiet, but his mom's up, and she comes out, and she's like very friendly and talking to them, and she makes them sit down and eat food.
Yeah.
And she like makes them this whole big meal. They have like bread and wine and pasta, like all kinds of stuff. Eating all this food. Meanwhile, the guy's body's out in the trunk, and Tommy has blood on his shirt. And it's just, the whole thing I thought was very funny, and I want to know if that happened in the book.
So they do stop at his mom's house, and yes, it is mentioned that she makes them sit and have breakfast with her while the body is in the trunk of the car. It's not a whole scene the way that it is in the movie, though.
Does she paint dogs?
That is not mentioned.
The dog painting is my favorite part of that
Unconfirmed.
scene. I love that moment. And then, like, so I didn't mention it in the prequel, but this was another scene that apparently was almost entirely like improvised, like almost supposedly almost that entire scene. Not much.
It could have been because it's not in the book,
right? Yeah, but yeah, supposedly like very little of that scene was like written. It was just like them kind of sitting around, bouncing off each other. Which the dog painting. So we move forward a little bit, and Henry, like all the other gangsters, have a girlfriend along with his wife, and eventually Karen finds out that Henry has this girlfriend on the side that he is like has put up an apartment nearby so he can go and stay there. She's very upset about this, and when she finally confirms that this has happened, Henry wakes up one morning and Karen is sitting on his chest with a gun in his face. Threatening to kill him. It's wild. Does that happen in the book?
Yes, it does. And I absolutely loved that scene in both the book and the movie. Karen was probably my favorite character in the whole book. A chaotic queen with Stan.
Okay. Fair enough. I get it. Yeah. I mean, she's putting up with some bullshit. That's for sure.
But Karen was really interesting to me in the way that she kind of just took to this life.
Yes, she does just sort of slip right in.
But also kind of like digs her heels in occasionally and doesn't really like want every single thing that comes along with it.
Yeah.
But she also just kind of slides right into it.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it is interesting. I think that is sort of a fun. It definitely gives you it's a much needed counterweight to Henry's character, like to feel like you have, because like I'm comparing it to something like in The Godfather, one of the sister who gets like abused the whole time, and it's just, you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Wow, what was her name?
Yeah, there's the sister in The Godfather who's just like she's getting abused the whole time.
Yeah.
And it's just
the
like
one who gets married at the beginning.
Yes, and I don't remember any of their names. The one whose son he goes to try to rescue and gets murdered. Anyways, it is an interesting, and it's a different scenario, but it's kind of similar. Like, you know, her husband is also like a gangster or whatever. And I thought it was interesting seeing a character who, like you said, is kind of slips into it and holds her own.
Yeah.
With these men in a way that you wouldn't typically expect in a narrative like this.
Yeah.
Like, or at least is not typical in a narrative like this.
And especially since she doesn't come from that background in any way.
Yeah,
like
not in
even
any way.
remotely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very interesting character, I thought.
Paulie sends Henry, and I don't remember why, something happens. Oh, the Karen situation. And he sends Henry and Jimmy down to Florida to take care of a job or whatever. They got to go get some money from some guy or something.
Shake a guy down.
Yeah, and the way they do it is they take him to the zoo. I think it's a Tampa Zoo or something like that. And they threaten to feed him to the lions. They like hold him in the lion pit. And my favorite moment in that scene is after they pull him out, and and the voiceover Henry's like, they must really feed lions or people to lions in Florida, because he gave up the money right away, which I love that line. And I wanted to know if the threatening to feed him to lions said in the book.
They do go down to Florida to shake a guy down at that point in the narrative, but they don't threaten to feed him to the lions at the zoo.
Yeah.
Although I did really like that addition.
Oh, that was fun. Henry does eventually get pinched. I don't remember why.
They get him because the guy that, I think it's the guy that they shake, it's either the guy they shake down.
Oh, his sister.
Or, yeah, his sister
goes to
works at the FBI. She's like a typist or whatever.
And she turns everybody in, basically, including her brother. And they all go away. And in the movie, we get this scene where they're in prison, and their prison cell is very cushy. Like it's like a hotel.
Yeah.
Like they're just like hanging out, cooking fancy meals, because they're wise guys. And I wanted to know if that is supposedly the real life story. They have like super cushy jail cells, or like where they're like cooking amazing meals and just hanging out.
Yeah, they basically have anything they want in prison. Seems like not really being in prison.
No, not really. Yeah, it's very much white collar. Like what you think of when you imagine like CEOs of companies like going to jail
Yeah.
or whatever, where they're like in jail for the weekend or whatever, and then get to leave and come back or whatever. There is a scene in that when they're cooking food, they're talking about how they make the food, or who's making the sauce or whatever, and about how Paulie, who also got thrown in jail,
He's in there for something else.
yeah, he was serving a sentence for something else. He chops the garlic, and he does this in the movie. This has always stuck with me because I thought it was so silly. Maybe not. Maybe it's because it's what they had, but it seemed like they had other silverware. But he cuts the garlic. He shaves it super thin with a razor blade, and so it just like melts in the pan. And I wanted to know if he cuts the garlic with a razor blade in the book, or if that's something
He does.
Okay. And then I thought about it, and I realized, it's basically just microplaning garlic. Like, that's basically what it is.
Yeah.
Or, like, using a garlic. Like, the scent, like, you're
He's
pulverizing
shaving
it
real thin.
down to a point where it does, like, liquefy, essentially, as soon as you start cooking it. But I always thought it was very funny watching him, like,
Maybe we should try it.
meticulously
we don't know.
cutting that garlic paper thin with a razor blade.
I guess you have time to do something like that if you're sitting in prison.
Yeah, well, and you don't have to try it because you can just buy a microplane and just microplane your garlic, because it does the same thing, I think, from my understanding, and it's way quicker than sitting there with a razor blade and trying to cut your garlic. After they get out of prison, well, while they're in prison, but then after, they get into selling drugs, which is this is a thing that Paulie has advised them against doing. It's very Godfather. This is the whole thing that sets off all the problems in the Godfather is they try to get into drugs before it's all been like, racketeering and whatnot. Other things, not dealing drugs, basically, and being involved in the drug trade. But Henry gets into the drug trade, and this is what eventually causes problems. And I wanted to know if that's what happens in the book, because I thought it was interesting. This is apparently, in these two movies, is the same thing that causes the issues, is drugs.
Yeah, it plays out exactly the same. Henry gets into selling drugs while he's in prison because it's such good money, and he needs money while he's in prison, but Paulie does not want him doing it because drugs are bad.
Drugs are bad, okay. Even the gangsters know that. This line, holy shit, this line cracked me up. I did not remember this line at all, but I think this is Christmas dinner, or not dinner, but like Christmas at the bar, I think.
Yeah.
This might even be after the Lufthansa heist, potentially.
Yes,
it is. It's right after. It's right after, because it's, And they're sitting at the bar, and the camera's like moving down the bar, and there are these two girls sitting there. And it might be Tommy's girlfriend.
I think so.
I think it is talking to this other girl. And Tommy's sitting there, or like kind of walks up behind her and says like, something. And the woman goes, he's so jealous. I mean, if I even look at anyone, he'll kill me. And the other woman goes, that's great. Like, the way she says that's great is so perfectly delivered. Like, I'm not getting into this, but oh dear Lord. That line got me. I want to know if that was in the book.
I don't think that was anywhere in the book, but I did love it.
Yeah. So good. Oh my God. The Lufthansa heist happens, and I wanted to know this. The movie doesn't show us any of the heist at all. We see a little bit of the prep work, kind of, and then like they kind of talk about what's going to happen, but then we just cut to it happened. And I think mainly that's because Henry's not involved in the actual events.
Yeah, he doesn't actually do the heist.
He's not there for the heist. He was involved in some of the planning stuff, but not like in the heist. So that's why we're not involved in it. But I want to know if the book does that. This is a separate question.
The book gives like a separate, like very kind of journalistic account of what happened during the heist.
We get a little bit of details in the movie through like news reports, but very little, like very minimal. But
But then it like cuts to like Henry's perspective, and he's like, I didn't even know it happened until I heard about it on the radio.
Yeah, which is what happens
in the movie.
Yeah, he's in the shower. But speaking of the Lufthansa heist, all of the people involved, Jimmy was like, don't spend any of the money. We got to stay low, be cool, and then we can spend the money eventually. Don't go out and buy a car. And then everybody goes out and buys a car the next day. And he's very upset about it. And he has everybody, ultimately, that was involved, other than Tommy and Henry, whacked because they couldn't keep it cool And I want to know does Jimmy have everybody whacked?
So the extravagant spending did happen according to Wikipedia, but it must have been only briefly mentioned in the book because I do not remember it. Jimmy does pick everyone off who was involved in the heist, though.
Well, there you
He
go.
gets murder happy.
Yep. Then Tommy gets whacked because for several things, the Billy thing and also just being a loose cannon and people not liking him and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But they tell him that he's going to be made. Like
Yeah.
he's going to become a made man, and they pick him up to take him to the ceremony to become a made man. And when he gets there in the movie, and now obviously only a few people would know if this actually happened, because I actually did a little research on this because I remembered that this happened, and I was like looking through like the real life Tommy's like Wikipedia, and it was like he just disappeared and we don't know what happened. It's like, okay, well, he got murdered clearly, but only a couple people would know, like, if he said anything. But I wanted to know in the thing in the movie that always stuck with me about that scene is he walks in and it's an empty room and he just goes, "Oh no," and then gets immediately shot. Like he just realizes instantly, like, "Oh fuck."
Yeah.
And that always, I say, it cracks me up because fuck Tommy, he's an asshole. But it made me laugh a lot. And I wanted to know if the "oh no," and then him getting whacked when he thinks he's gonna get made.
So we do think that he's going to get made, and then he does get whacked because they find out that he was responsible for Billy Bats. We don't see it in the book, though.
Right.
We just hear about it later.
Yeah.
Like, I forget who tells Henry. I guess maybe Jimmy tells Henry or
Yeah.
Polly. I don't know. Tommy got whacked.
Yeah.
But I really liked the movie's decision to actually show us what happened.
Yeah.
I also liked Robert De Niro pushing over the phone booth.
Very upset
after
about
he
it.
finds out that
Yeah.
it happened.
I will say it is one of the few times that the movie does give us something out of the perspective of Henry,
Yeah.
which is interesting. But I think that kind of had to, because Tommy is one of our main characters, and if he, like, it would be
Right,
very
he can't die off
unsatisfying. He can't just
screen.
like disappear and then we find out, oh, they killed him.
Yeah.
It's like he's one of the main characters. It kind
We
of
have to see the body.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, you wouldn't believe it. Yeah, 100%. So then we get to our final chaotic day here before Henry gets arrested. And it's got a bunch of drug deals. There's all kinds of stuff going. There's so much chaos. He's got to make dinner. He's got to do all this stuff. And he's all hopped up on cocaine the entire time. And
Increasingly hopped up on
increasingly
cocaine.
hopped up on cocaine the entire time. And it's the editing and the pacing of this scene of this whole climax is really brilliant because it makes you very anxious. It's such a chaotic nightmare. But one of the things I thought was interesting is they're talking about this helicopter that's following them around, and there's times where we see it and other times where we don't, and sort of implying like you aren't sure, at least at first, if it's like him just being paranoid, or if it's actually like a helicopter. We do see a helicopter sometimes, but you're like, could it be like just like a traffic helicopter? Or then other times they're looking up and we just see like a blank sky. I don't know. I thought it was interesting. I want to know if the whole helicopter deal and that whole chaotic nightmare of a day happens in the book.
Yeah, all of that is from the book. Every last bit of it. I spent most of that section thinking that the helicopter was going to end up being like him hallucinating somehow.
It does kind of feel like that in the movie.
It's a red helicopter in the book. He keeps saying he's seeing a red helicopter, and I was like, bro, you're tripping. Like, you're a red helicopter following you around.
Yeah.
But I think at some point somebody else sees it too.
Yeah.
So
Interesting. But then the thing, finally, when he does get busted, he's got to take the babysitter who they've been using to smuggle drugs places via flights. She's got to, she won't fly without her lucky hat. And she's got to go home and get her hat. And this ultimately doesn't really end up mattering in the movie because they just go out to the car to leave. And that's when he gets busted. Like all the feds or whatever come out. And it feels like the movie's trying to imply that, like, without this weird, quirky event of her needing her hat, he wouldn't have got busted. But if he would have just gone out to take her to the airport, they still would have got busted. Like, it wouldn't have mattered. But I wanted to know if that weird hat thing, does she need her hat to fly? Does that come from the book?
yeah, it does. She's got her lucky hat that she wears when she's being a drug mule.
Yes.
Although in the book, the hat is described as being pink and blue and like really gaudy and ugly, which in the movie she's just wearing like a brown bucket hat.
Yeah.
So I think the book's version of the hat is better.
Yes, I agree. And then finally, we see this a couple times in the movie, but Jimmy is getting older because he's an adult man when Henry and Tommy are
he's
like
older than
kids.
them.
Yeah, he's like at least 10 years older, if not 20 years older or something like that. And we see him a couple times. He's wearing these glasses, and they're these giant glasses that are super thick, and they magnify his eyes, and they make him look so hilarious. Like they just, because again, with this character who we've seen murder people, and then he puts these big, Coke bottle glasses on, and he looks like like your stereotypical like 1950s like middle school dweeb or something. It's just very funny, and I wanted to know if those Coke bottle glasses were in the book.
So they're not mentioned in the book, but I did see a picture of him getting arrested when I was looking up stuff about the Lufthansa heist, and he was wearing like big like 70s 80s
Really?
glasses.
There you go.
And actually kind of looked like De Niro.
Yeah,
like it was good casting.
They did pretty good. I think Tommy looks the least like Joe Pesci looks the least like Tommy. But from my memory, from what I've seen, Ray Liotta looks at least a little bit like Henry Hill.
I saw Henry Hill, a photo of him too. He has like a more 70s haircut than Ray Liotta does.
Yeah,
in
he's
the
not quite as
movie,
handsome.
But,
Like,
yeah.
It's not like a movie star, but yeah. Same for all of them. They're like
Right.
movie stars, whatever. But yeah, I agree. I did think that De Niro does look a lot like Jimmy. All right, those are all my was that in the book questions. I have one question for Lost in Adaptation.
Just show me the way to get out of here, and I'll be on my way.
Wow, is it lost?
Yes, and I want to get unlost as soon as possible.
So assuming this scene happens in the book, there's this moment after everything's kind of Henry has become persona non grata with the family. There's been a fallout, and Karen's going to talk to Jimmy to ask for help or money or I can't remember what. And Jimmy is like, "Oh, just go down around the corner and go in his building. Go talk. Just go in there." And then she goes down there and she looks inside and she's like, "Nah, this ain't it.
Yeah.
I'm getting out of here." And the movie never explicitly, comes to tells us as an audience whether or not like was she gonna get whacked, was she just being paranoid, what was going on, because she had been telling Henry that he was paranoid about the whole thing, but then she kind of is like, well, maybe not. And I wanted to know if the book ever like explicitly says like, oh, what happened there, or what was going to happen.
That exact scene is in the book. We don't find out what Jimmy actually intended to happen, similar to the movie, but it's pretty clear that like it was either a hit or he was gonna have somebody like rough her up to send a message. One of those two things.
Something bad.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. That's what's implied in the movie.
Yeah.
But also we kind of are playing with this thing of like how paranoid are they versus what's, you know what I mean? Like, so we're supposed to like not really be sure if she's just being like overly paranoid or if it actually is something bad. So yeah. Okay, cool. All right. Time now to find out what Katie thought was better in the book.
You like to read?
Oh, yes. I love to read.
What do you like to read?
Everything.
There's actually another airport heist earlier in the book where they rob an airport, which I'm fine with the movie dropping because I think that would have been too repetitive. We don't need it in the narrative.
It might be mentioned.
It might have been.
I think it might have been
Because
mentioned.
I think they do talk about how they like own the airport.
Yeah.
At one point in the movie, but this particular heist, they plan it out, and it all hinges on getting the keys from this very like overzealous guard, like the night guard or whatever, who takes his job like very seriously, and he like is never without the keys.
Yeah.
And their whole plan hinges around getting these keys so that they can make a copy of the key that they need to get into where like all of the unmarked bills are in this airport.
Right.
And the lengths to which they go to get a copy of this key, I found very funny. Like, they end up, like, hiring a prostitute to, like, distract this guy at a hotel. And, like, the first time they hire her, he, like, doesn't leave the keys in his room, so they have to, like, hire her again and go back.
Yeah.
There's a section in the book when Harry gets his first girlfriend, who was Linda in the book, and she has a different name in the movie. I don't remember what now. They changed a couple of the names of the, like, smaller characters. But his girlfriend Linda in the book, and there's this whole chapter. It might have been my favorite part in the book. It was so funny, where it flips back and forth between quotes from Linda and quotes from Karen before Karen has figured out that Linda is the girlfriend. And they're both saying...
her girlfriend, her name's Janice. In
the movie? Okay.
Yeah.
But they're both saying the same thing about each other. They're both like... she's so desperate. She's such a sad sack. And it just, like, goes back and forth. I found it very funny.
Interesting.
When he goes to jail in the book, he goes in a limo, which I thought was fun.
Yeah, we don't.
I feel like that was a missed opportunity.
He does have, like, he has, like, a night at the bar.
Yeah.
Where they, like, all have drinks, and then he just goes.
Yeah.
But yeah.
It's mentioned, like, kind of offhand at one point in the book that they rob Estee Lauder, the person, not the company.
Wow.
They rob her of her jewels. It was a name that I wasn't expecting to see in this book. I was like, Estee Lauder, interesting, okay. There's a whole big section in the book about how they throw college basketball games. They, like, bring these players in, and they're like, here's what we want you to do. We don't want you to lose the games necessarily, but we want you to shave points so that we can bet on, like, a certain margin.
Right. Interesting.
But then it turns out the kids are really bad at it.
Well, yeah, they're high school kids or college kids.
Yeah. So that ends up being, like, a bust. And then later on in the book, after he's working with the FBI, he's, like, mentions that he was involved with that, and one of the FBI guys there was on the team for some of the games that he fixed.
That's hilarious.
And, like, gets really mad about it. There's a lot at the end of the book where they're talking about, like, how he got caught by the feds, who the feds have his, like, phones tapped and everything. And there's a lot about, like, the code that they used to talk about drugs over the phone. One note is that it's revealed that the code they use on the phone for his girlfriend's house is the Bat Cave.
Okay.
They call it the Bat Cave.
Okay.
And then there's this whole, like, transcript of a coded exchange that they have over the phone that makes no earthly sense. They're just saying gibberish. And I'm reading it, I'm like, oh, of course the feds know you're speaking in code. That couldn't be anything but code.
Yeah.
You guys are dumb.
I guess the idea is that they're like, oh, it's okay if it's code, because, like, it's okay if they know that it's a code, because if they don't know what it is, like, it's fine.
I guess, but now they've caught you and you've got no defense because you were just saying gibberish.
True. What were they saying? Read it. I want to know. I want to hear some of it.
All right. So this is an exchange between Henry Hill and Paul Mazzei, who is his Pittsburgh distributor. Of such bizarre syntax that any jury would convict, the book says. All right. Mazzei, you know the golf club and the dogs you gave me in return? Hill, yeah. Mazzei, can you still do that? Hill, same kind of golf clubs? Mazzei, no golf clubs. Can you still give me the dogs if I pay for the golf clubs? Hill, yeah, sure. Mazzei, you front me the shampoo and I'll front you the dog pills. What time tomorrow? Hill, anytime after 12. Mazzei, you won't hold my lady friend up? Hill, no. Mazai, somebody will just exchange dogs.
Yeah. So yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's clear.
That's clearly code.
Clearly something's going on there. Yeah.
My last note here that I thought was interesting in the book, supposedly when they go into witness protection, they got to help come up with their new names.
No.
It was like something that they were like trying to get the kids excited about. Like, you get to pick a new name.
You get a new name.
Obviously, we don't know what the names are.
Right.
But I thought that was interesting. I would not think that you would get to help pick your name.
Yeah. I mean, maybe like the first. Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Huh. All right. Time now to find out what Katie thought was better in the movie.
My life has taught me one lesson, Hugo, and not the one I thought it would. Happy endings only happen in the movies.
So there's this whole plot line early on in the book where like Henry's around like 17 or 18 and he's been like borrowing his dad's gun for them to use, but then his dad like figured out that he was taking it. And he doesn't like, he's afraid that what his dad is gonna say. And he's also like worried about what like Polly and them are gonna say if he can't bring the gun back. So to avoid conflict with either party, he enlists in the army. And then that went like absolutely nowhere. So I was glad that the movie skipped that whole plot line because I was like, what is the point of this? I don't know. He goes into the army. He's in the army for a while and continues to like do shenanigans and crime while he's in the army. And then he gets out and he just goes back to being a gangster.
Well, there you go.
I don't recall the book talking about this, but at the wedding we see everybody giving them envelopes of money, and they have like the bag at the wedding. Yeah. And I don't recall that being mentioned in the book, but I did like it because it felt like a nod to The Godfather.
Yeah, it's also it's a pretty standard.
Oh, and I mean, I know it's like a cultural thing, but it reminded me of like, because there's a whole big thing at the wedding at The Godfather with like, oh, the purse with the money.
Yeah.
So it kind of felt almost like a nod to that. Really weird part in the book. Henry and Karen buy a slave.
What?
This is a very like offhand weird thing that's just mentioned, and I was like, it's like literally like 2 paragraphs of information that I read like 8 times because I was like, pardon me, what? So Karen wants somebody to help with the housework,
right?
And Henry's like, I don't want a stranger coming in here. So he talks to Polly, I think, and Polly's like, I know a guy who can get you a girl.
Oh no.
So they buy a slave, a Haitian girl, says in the book. And then when she gets there, she is apparently like 6 feet tall and scary looking, and she scares the children, so they send her back.
Oh, okay.
It was very like I read that over and over like what?
That's something.
So the movie made the very obvious choice to leave that out.
I mean, yeah, I will say, I mean, that is it, but it also is one of those things where it's like, it definitely casts a little bit of a different light on our main character.
Yeah.
That the fact that they didn't include that, which is, it's definitely, we're brushing over some.
I mean, definitely brushing over something very important. Yeah. But it all like it doesn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a very weird like the fact that it's just like offhand mentioned, like, oh yeah, they bought a slave. Cool.
Great.
Cool beans. There's a whole plot line when he's in prison that like eventually he gets sent, and this is like something that he wants. This is his goal. There's a prison dairy farm where you can go, and instead of being in like regular prison, you're like working on the dairy farm, and he wants to
like
do
a work
that.
Release deal.
Yeah, and he wants to do that because there's like more freedom with it. But I thought just skipping all of that made sense.
Yeah.
We skip over like most of the prison stuff in the movie.
Yeah, we get a very brief, and then we get a couple of like this drug smuggling stuff.
Yeah, it's kind of more like a quick montage in the movie. The line when Henry's talking to, when they're initially talking to the guy about going into witness protection, and Henry's like, I don't want to go any place that's cold.
Mm-hmm. And if you missed the prequel, that guy in the movie is the actual Fed or whatever who was the guy who helped put them into witness protection in real life.
Yeah.
He just played himself in the movie.
I feel like I would be the opposite. I mean, I wouldn't want to go to like Alaska or somewhere, but I would also be, please don't send me anywhere that's like 1,000,000 degrees.
No,
around.
I agree. I'm much more of a cold
How
weather
about
person,
somewhere
cool weather
temperate?
person. Yes. Yeah. Give me a shack in the middle of the Pacific Northwest, please.
My last note here, I really liked that the movie condensed the ending.
Yeah.
The ending of the book, like from the point where he gets pinched by the feds for drugs till the end, just kind of drags. It winds down very slowly, which I know, and like the book is an account of what really happened, supposedly.
Right.
So a proceeding like that obviously is going to drag in real life.
Yeah.
It was kind of a chore to read.
All right, time to find out what the movie nailed.
As I expected, practically perfect in every way.
Many things.
Many things. This is the longest list.
I'm going to try to skip over stuff that we've already talked about. He does get a job at the cab stand at the beginning. That's how he gets started. Fun little detail that I wasn't necessarily expecting to be in the movie. In that first scene, we see a car pull up and like a gangster get out, and the car like rises as he gets out, and that's mentioned in the book.
Interesting, yeah. It's the weight, his gravitas.
His gravitas, yes. When he goes and gets his new suit, and his mom's like, my God, you look like a gangster.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
The guy who got shot outside the cab stand, outside the restaurant or whatever, wherever it was.
Yeah.
And he's like staunching the blood with all the aprons.
Yeah. You wasted 8 aprons.
Wasting the aprons. First time he gets arrested for selling cigarettes, they all say that he broke his cherry.
Mm-hmm.
Not usually what that phrase means.
Nope. Although it's often used in other...
Fair, yeah.
I mean, especially back then, it's not as popular of a saying anymore because it's, weird and gross. But yeah.
I mentioned this, but I do want to say again, I was not expecting Karen to have voiceover narration in the movie.
Yeah.
I figured that would be something that got nixed, so I was kind of pleasantly surprised.
I'd actually almost forgotten. I did, as soon as it happened, I was like, oh, that's right. She does do voiceover for like parts of it, but yeah.
And then when he goes over to meet her parents for the first time, she has him like cover up his cross necklace.
Yeah, because her Jewish
she
parents.
told him that he was half Jewish.
Yeah.
So the character who gives them the tip about the Lufthansa, it's Marty in the book and Maury in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
That's not really important, but he does sell wigs. And the specific wig commercial where he jumps in the pool and then like his wig is still
it won't come
on,
off. Yeah.
That's from the book.
Nice.
When they're getting married, and Karen is talking about how everybody at the wedding is named Paul or Peter, and all of the women are named Marie, and they all name their daughters Marie. That's directly from the book.
I almost asked about that, but I was like, nah, that sounds true.
Also, the gag where her and her parents are like waiting up for him all night, and then he gets there and her mom starts yelling at him, and he just turns around and leaves again.
Yeah.
When Karen goes to the hostess party with all of the mafia wives, and she's like looking around like, ooh, these girls look rough.
Yeah.
That's from the book. Also, Karen's rationale about being nice to the cops when they come to the house, because why would you cause a fuss?
Not gonna help.
Fridays are for girlfriends and Saturdays are for wives.
I think it was the opposite in the movie. Or maybe. Now I can't remember. Yeah, either way.
They do eventually have to dig up and rebury Billy Bats after they buried him the first time, because there's going to be like construction or something where they buried him. Henry does have his girlfriend's boss at the bridal shop roughed up
because she's getting in trouble for not doing a good job.
Getting in trouble at work for not doing her job. Tommy shooting Spider, the waiter. He shoots him in the foot.
Oh, and
then later on murders him for realsies.
Poor Spider.
I know.
That actor, I can't remember his name, went on to most famously be in like all of what's the HBO mobster, The Sopranos.
Oh.
Yeah.
So according to Karen, mentioned in the book and the movie, the book goes into it a little bit more. The mob does not support wives and families while their husbands are in jail, which is literally the opposite.
Yeah, I
of
thought
what
that
they
was
say
interesting because in the Godfather it's like specifically the opposite.
They make a big point in the Godfather out of like, we'll take care of you.
Yeah, I don't know. I wonder if that was a thing that changed. If that's like a real life thing where that like. In the 50s or whatever.
Yeah, I don't know.
That was the case, but then...
Maybe it's, something that changed.
Something happened.
Or maybe that's only the case if you're high up enough.
True, because... Oh, and maybe if you're made.
Yeah.
Because, Henry's not.
Yeah.
He's just,
And it is interesting, though, because it says specifically in the book, and I think they say it in the movie, too. I think she says in her voiceover, like, it's not like what they tell you in the movies.
Oh, I missed that.
They don't take care of you.
Yeah, I do wonder if it is like that if you're like... But Pacino... Well, he doesn't go to... Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Interesting.
She does sneak things into prison for him by, like, strapping them to her body under her coat. There's a big long description of how she does it in the book that was really interesting. The horrible white Christmas tree with the purple ornaments.
Oh God.
Is from the book. And I was not expecting it to be in the movie, but
it's there.
Oh darn, there it was.
I hate white Christmas trees so much.
Yeah, me too.
I hate any Christmas tree, honestly, that's not like doesn't look like a real tree. Not a fan of alternatively colored Christmas trees. Don't like them.
I wouldn't have like a colorful Christmas tree, but I think if you really commit to the aesthetic, it can work.
I'm not saying it can't work for certain people. But I
personally would not have one. When he gets caught, and he's like, I knew as soon as I heard him that it was the cops. Only cops talk like that. Karen does flush the cocaine. She does hide a pistol in her underwear. Mm-hmm. Very interesting. I would be very nervous about that.
With the pistol in your underwear?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, his girlfriend does not wash the cocaine dust off of her dishes. Disgusting.
What?
They bring all the dishes into the precinct when they're questioning him, and they've all got like dust all over them. I was reading that in the book. I was like, oh, she doesn't like to wash dishes, so she just leaves the cocaine all over the dishes. And I was like, ma'am, I guess it doesn't matter if you're already snorting it.
Yeah,
but ma'am, gross. He does sleep with his gun. In the ending days when he's paranoid that he's gonna get whacked. Mm-hmm. Also, he has a line at the end about wanting to get spaghetti with marinara, and they gave him egg noodles.
With ketchup?
The bit about ketchup is not in the book, but the bit about the egg noodles is.
There you go. There's a fun thing. At one point later in his life, Henry Hill started a pasta sauce line. He had a whole line of pasta sauce, like Henry Hill pasta sauce.
That's kind of amazing.
That, I think it was after the movie came out or something like that. Yeah, when he was like, not in witness protection anymore, because at some point he got out of it in the 90s or something like that. And he had a whole line of pasta sauce, which I thought was funny.
All right, I guess.
Yeah. All right, time to get to a few odds and ends before we hit the final verdict. The beginning of this movie is like an absolute masterclass in world building and character development. You learn absolutely everything you need to know about Paulie, Henry, and Jimmy in like the first 10 minutes of this movie, and it's like riveting the whole time and super well paced, and it's just like it's nonstop, and it sounds like it's similar to the book in terms of like the way they like move through kind of explaining everything that's going on, without obviously like starting on the Billy Bats murder. But it's just, I was once again reminded of how incredibly paced this movie is for 2.5 hours long, and how breakneck it is at times, but also just how concise the storytelling is. Like, you just get everything you need to know in like 10 minutes.
Yeah, this is very economical storytelling.
Yeah, wild.
Which we know I love.
Yes.
Also, I just want to mention young Henry. Really top-notch casting.
Looks
He
just
looks
like
like
Ray Liotta. Yeah, it is
just
wild.
like him.
Yeah, him as a teenager. It is. It blew me away again. I was like, oh, that's right. I remember being like, how did they find this kid?
Yeah.
It was like his son or something. Like, yeah. Another thing about Ray Liotta that I thought was really funny is like once he ages up and he's just getting into like the gangster, or not just getting into it, but like once he's actually played by Ray Liotta. There's a conversation, and he's on a date or something, and somebody's talking about, I think it might be Karen, talking about how like this 21-year-old or whatever, and it's Ray Liotta when he starred in this film was like 35 or something, and I was like, he does not look 21 at any point in this movie. He does not look like a 21. He looks like a dude in his early 30s. And he looks progressively older as the film goes on, because he gets more and more sort of like, he's like sweatier and like and more he's doing more drugs and stuff. So he looks older and older, but like even at his youngest in this movie, he does not look 21 years old. But then again, back then, people in their 20s looked like they were in their 40s a lot of the time, just because for
and
whatever
he's living
reason.
hard.
Yeah, that's true too. Lots of smoking and drinking. Yeah.
Another thing that I thought this movie did a really, really good job with was showing what year we were in through the sets and costumes and styling.
Yeah.
Like, it's really very impeccable.
Yeah, it is really good. And it's another thing that reminds me of The Godfather, because they do the same thing where we get time jumps without any without like on screen.
And we do have on screen text in this movie.
Do we?
Yeah. Yeah, they a couple times they tell you what year it is.
Oh, I thought they didn't. Interesting. Seems like they could have gotten away without it.
I think they probably could have.
Yeah.
But they still, like, whoever did, like, the set dressings especially, like, did a really good job.
Yeah, and that was my next note, was just, like, everything about Henry's post-prison drug money home is the worst ever. It's so...
It's
late 70s, early 80s.
Not a single ounce of good taste to be found in the 1970s.
Oh, God, it's hideous. It's so hideous. That wall that opens up with the TV, and it's like,
like the patterned wallpaper, and
it's all terrible. It's all so bad. It reminds me, it's like in Back to the Future 2, like Biff's like mansion.
Yeah,
it looks like that. It's it's hideous. So I think I figured out where the 10 frames of blood they had to cut is. Because while there is quite a bit of blood at different times throughout this movie, the main moment is when Tommy gets whacked.
Oh, yeah.
They shoot him and blood shoots out of his head.
Yeah, we see it like
for a
second,
over the floor. For like a half of a second. It's probably like 10 frames or 15 frames. And I bet they had an extra few frames in there, and that's what they had to cut. Because that's the main time. The other time it's like blood on clothes, not like actively... coming out of a person.
Out of someone.
Yeah. So I'm betting that's the 10 frames of blood they had to cut. And then finally, before we get to your final verdict, I did want to talk about a little bit, just kind of, since we did just do The Godfather, kind of comparing it. We kind of have over the course of this, because I had mentioned in the prequel and stuff, or at some point, about how, from my memory, having seen GoodFellas before, that it's not the virtuosic masterpiece that The Godfather is. And now having revisited it, I think I still feel the same. I think this movie's very good, but I still think, having only seen The Godfather once, I thought that I found The Godfather to be a more compelling overall, and maybe a more timeless piece of cinema than GoodFellas potentially. I don't know. I just wanted to see what you thought, and like which you preferred, and like why.
Okay, here are my thoughts. Is The Godfather a better crafted piece of cinema as art? I think probably yes. Is it more timeless? Yes. Which did I prefer? I think I preferred this.
Interesting. And I think there are a lot of people that would. I will say I think a lot of people would say the same thing. Like I think a lot of people would say that they prefer watching Goodfellas.
I enjoyed the pacing of Goodfellas more.
They're about the same length. They're both about like 2.5 hours.
I enjoyed the character exploration more. And I enjoyed that it was a less romanticized version of a similar premise.
Yeah. I agree with that. I agree with a lot of that. I still think that and maybe for me, it's coming off of having seen Goodfellas a couple times and having finally seen The Godfather and it kind of, living up to the hype, kind of writing that maybe I'm overvaluing The Godfather. I mean, not according to most critics, but but it is. They both were Oscar won 1 million Oscars each and are in among the like top 10, top 20 films of all time on most lists or whatever. I will say the thing that really stuck out to me. They're very different movies while being very similar, which is really interesting because they are both sort of documentations of this tragic. Obviously, one of them is based on a true story, and the other one isn't, or at least not directly based on a true story. It's inspired by some true events and whatnot, I think. But the thing that really I think stuck out to me is just I found the tragic narrative arc of Michael. I was like Sonny. No, it's the other one. Michael Corleone, just to be so fascinating and sad, and just again something about his character arc and the way it plays out feels timeless in the way that it's probably overwrought to compare it to something like a Shakespearean tragedy, but it does feel to me very similar in its inevitability and in the way it and this movie has Goodfellas has a lot of similar feelings, but I think I don't know what it was about it. Maybe it's because it's not as frenetic, it's not as of its time, it's not as early 90s, like the pacing and everything, which I think does work in this movie's favor. I think Goodfellas, the frenetic pace of it does help it move as a movie and does make it really engaging and entertaining throughout. I just something about the way that Godfather sits in quiet moments and really like gives the actors time to like build these really deep, just I don't know, tragic characters. I found more compelling, at least on first view. I would be interested eventually to revisit The Godfather again, think about it and see where I land. But I do think that if I had to pick one that I thought was like a better film, but also like what I prefer, like if I was going to watch one again 5 years from now, I think I would watch The Godfather again. I don't know. Anyways.
See, now outside of this podcast, my metric for films is really quite simple.
Yes.
I'm a simple girl.
Yeah.
If you asked me right now, would you rather rewatch The Godfather or Goodfellas? I would rather rewatch Goodfellas.
Interesting. Yeah. And to be fair, for me, my part of that might be I have seen Goodfellas 3 or 4 times, and I've seen The Godfather once. If it had been the other way around, I might be feeling the opposite. You know what I mean? If I had seen Godfather 3 or 4 times in film school and then growing up, and had just watched Goodfellas for the first time, I might feel reverse of how I feel now. But anyways, so that was interesting because it is, like I said, it's very clear that Goodfellas is sort of riding on the shoulders of the giant that is The Godfather.
Yeah.
And doing its own thing in a very different way, while, like you said, you mentioned several times throughout, alluding to little things here and there, and sort of pointing back to the thing that preceded it. I don't know. So that was interesting. I wanted to talk about it, but yeah, I think I prefer The Godfather. Anyways. All right, before we get to the final verdict, we wanted to remind you can do us a giant favor by heading over to patreon.com/thisfilmislit. Support us there for $2, $5, or $15 a month. Get access to different stuff at each level, including bonus content at the $5 and up level and priority recommendation at the $15 and up level. This episode was a patron request from one of our $15 patrons, Kelly Napier. Got a 2-for-1 deal with GoodFellas, as we just discussed, or with Godfather, as we just discussed. But thank you very much, Kelly, for recommending GoodFellas and letting us talk about this fantastic film and book. Also, you can all help by heading over to social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Goodreads. And right now, it's more important than ever because you're in the final few days, right?
We're getting there.
Final couple days, yeah, of our Cinderella March Madness. Spoilers for what's coming up next. But our Cinderella March Madness, you can go vote. Go follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. Vote in the polls that are going up every day at noon. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in just a second after our final verdict.
Now, are you ready for your sentence?
Sentence? But there must be a verdict first.
Sentence first, verdict afterward.
I enjoyed this book. It's definitely written in a journalistic style, which, to be honest, is not my favorite. But it's jam-packed with really interesting characters, events, and a lot of fascinating little details. The book falls down for me, I think, because it can't escape the fact that it is journalism. So despite the interesting subject matter, it's a little dry at times. Some of the events are very similar and end up feeling repetitive. The level of detail often feels superfluous. And the fact that it doesn't and can't move at a narrative pace means that it often drags, especially around the end. The movie doesn't suffer from any of those issues. It drags never. It is dry not at all. And I thought that the script treatment did a truly excellent job of drafting a coherent narrative out of a person's life and experiences. It eliminated what wasn't necessary, it emphasized the most fascinating elements, and it did a really amazing job of taking little details from different sections of the book and putting them together in ways that made sense. All this while managing to remain stunningly faithful to the text.
Yeah.
There are a lot of changes, but this is somehow still an incredibly faithful adaptation.
Almost all of my was that in the books were answered with yes. Almost all of them.
So for those reasons, I'm giving this one to the movie.
Fantastic. Fascinating. Awesome. Katie, what's next?
Well, like
As I
you mentioned, like you spoiled.
I mean, it's already been on social media.
Yeah. But if you are following us on social media, you know that we have been running daily polls, and we are currently making our way through a bracket of adaptations of Cinderella, because there are a lot of them.
Very many. So many. You didn't even pick all of them. You just...
Yeah, there were more that could have been included, but I got to a point and I was like, this is probably enough.
Yeah.
So as of the time that we're recording this, we are all the way through like the first round of eliminations, like the very outside of the bracket.
When you're listening to this tomorrow, if you're listening to this today, it comes out, we'll have just finished the first, right? Or no? Are we doing 2 days for...
No, it's each poll is only 24 hours.
Yeah. But didn't the poll for round 2 just go up?
Yes.
Today?
Today when we're recording that, we started on like the second round of eliminations in the bracket. So as you're hearing this, I believe the poll that will be up at noon on Wednesday today will be the 1965 Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella adaptation versus the 1997 Rodgers and Hammerstein Cinderella adaptation. Yeah. So if you are interested in weighing in at all on what film you would like to hear us discuss in 2 weeks' time, head over to any of our social media pages to vote.
You can vote on all of them. Yes, and it's going down. Eventually, it'll get down to the final two, and then we'll vote one, and that's the one we'll cover in a couple weeks when we talk about Cinderella. And then in 1 week's time, we'll know by our prequel.
Yeah, we'll
right?
know by the prequel.
So we'll know by the prequel, and we'll do our little normal prequel stuff about Cinderella in 1 week's time. And in 2 weeks' time, we're talking about one of these Cinderella films. Who knows? I have a guess which one I think it's going to be, but you thought it was going to be something different, so we'll see.
We'll find out.
Very interested to see what ends up winning. Go vote and come back in 1 week's time to find out what won and learn a little bit more about Cinderella. And until that time, guys, gals, non-binary pals, and everybody else,
Keep reading books.
keep watching movies.
And keep being awesome.